The silence in Mr. Vance's villa was not an empty thing. It was a presence, thick and heavy as velvet, smelling of old paper, lemon oil, and the faint, clean scent of the sea drifting through the open terrace doors. For 3 days, it had been my only companion, and I had been profoundly grateful for it. My life back in the city was a cacophony of sirens, demanding clients, and the ceaseless, grinding hum of my own anxiety. Here, the only sounds were the distant crash of waves on the private beach below, the whisper of the air conditioning, and the slow, solemn tick of a grandfather clock in the hall. My friend Clara, who worked as a junior archivist for Vance Industries, had arranged this for me. "He needs someone for 2 weeks, Leo," she'd said, her voice a conspiratorial hiss over the phone. "Just to be there, water the plants, collect the mail. His regular guy is out with a broken leg." She'd paused, then added, "The place is a fortress. You won't have to worry about a thing. And Leo, you need a break. And a quiet place to work." She didn't know the half of it. The quiet place to work was a moot point. My high-end laptop, the very engine of my freelance graphic design career, had given up the ghost a week ago with a sad little sizzle and a puff of smoke. The repair estimate was a figure that made my stomach clench. My savings were a ghost haunting a long empty bank account. I was adrift, and this house-sitting gig was a lifeline. A roof over my head that wasn't my cramped, overpriced apartment, and a small payment that would at least cover my groceries for the next month. So I'd said yes. I'd packed a small bag, a stack of paperbacks, and my sketchbook, feeling like a displaced person seeking asylum. The key had been left with a security guard at the main gate, a man with a face carved from granite who'd looked me over once, checked my ID against his list, and waved me through without a word. The villa itself, perched on a cliff overlooking the Pacific, was less a house and more a monument to quiet, formidable wealth. It was all clean lines of stone and glass, softened by ancient, sprawling bougainvillea and the deep green of meticulously kept gardens. Inside, it was a temple of taste. Nothing shouted. The furniture was understated. The art was abstract and powerful. The colors were muted tones of sand, slate, and sea. It was a space designed for a person who needed no validation. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, terrified of leaving a mark, of breathing too loudly. I watered the stoic-looking succulents on the windowsill. I sorted the mail, mostly magazines about finance and architecture, and I spent long hours on the terrace, sketching the horizon until my fingers ached. I knew of Arthur Vance, of course. Everyone did. He was a titan, a name synonymous with innovation and ruthless business acumen. Clara's reverence for him was tinged with a healthy dose of fear. The photos I'd seen online matched the reputation. A man in his late 50s, with silver-streaked dark hair, a severe jawline, and eyes that seemed to look right through the camera lens. He was handsome in a way that was intimidating, a force of nature condensed into a bespoke suit. The man who owned this house of perfect, unnerving calm was anything but. I had a small photograph of him, tucked into the folder of instructions Clara had given me. It was a candid shot, probably from a company newsletter. He wasn't smiling, but the severity was absent. He was looking at something off camera, and there was a softness in his gaze, a hint of contemplation that the official portraits never captured. I'd found myself looking at it more often than I cared to admit, trying to reconcile the man in the photo with the billionaire mogul and the silent, monastic owner of this villa. I was building a fantasy, a story about a man I'd never met, just to make the silence feel less like an absence and more like a choice. On the 4th night, a thick fog rolled in from the ocean, pressing against the vast windows and muffling the sound of the waves. The world outside vanished, leaving the villa suspended in a cloud. I made myself a simple dinner of pasta and sat at the enormous oak dining table, feeling comically small. The grandfather clock chimed 10. I washed my plate, dried it, and placed it back in the cupboard with surgical precision, erasing the evidence of my existence. I was heading toward the guest suite, a lovely set of rooms at the far end of the west wing, when I heard it. A sound that did not belong. The soft crunch of tires on the gravel of the driveway. My heart hammered against my ribs. Security was supposed to call. No one was expected. My mind raced through a dozen terrible scenarios, each more unlikely than the last. I stood frozen in the cavernous hallway, a statue of pure adrenaline. Then I heard the click of a key in the front door. Not the sound of a break-in, but the confident, familiar sound of a key sliding home. The heavy oak door swung inward, and a man stepped inside, bringing a swirl of damp, salty air with him. He was tall, silhouetted against the foggy gloom, holding a single leather briefcase. He switched on the entryway light, and my breath caught in my throat. It was him, Arthur Vance. He looked different from the photographs. Older, but also less severe. The lines around his eyes were deeper, etched by fatigue. His dark hair, threaded with more silver than the pictures showed, was damp from the fog. He wore a simple dark sweater and trousers, not a suit. He looked, more than anything, profoundly tired. He didn't see me at first. He set his briefcase down with a quiet thud, then ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of sheer exhaustion. He closed his eyes for a moment, his shoulders slumping slightly. In that unguarded second, he was not a titan of industry. He was just a man, home after a long journey, seeking refuge. Then his eyes opened and found me, standing motionless in the dim hallway. They were gray, I noted with a strange sense of detachment. Not cold, as I'd expected, but the color of a calm sea before a storm. Surprise flickered across his face, quickly replaced by a guarded, neutral expression. His posture straightened, the brief moment of vulnerability gone as if it had never been. "Hello," he said. His voice was low and resonant, calmer than I would have imagined. It held no alarm, only a quiet, assessing quality. "You must be Leo." My own name, spoken in that voice, sounded foreign. My throat was dry. I managed a nod, my entire body rigid with the social awkwardness of the situation. I was the intruder here. I was the unexpected variable in this man's perfect, ordered world. "Mr. Vance," I croaked, my voice a disgrace. "I'm so sorry. They said, the schedule said you weren't due back for another 10 days. He offered a faint, weary smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. The deal in Tokyo closed early. There was no reason to stay. He looked around the silent hall, his gaze sweeping over the familiar surroundings. I apologized for the surprise. I should have called ahead, but I confess, the thought of one more phone call was beyond me. He was apologizing to me. The absurdity of it was almost enough to make me laugh, but the sound was trapped in my chest. I just stood there, waiting for the inevitable. The polite but firm request for me to pack my things. The call for a car. The end of my brief sanctuary. Instead, he looked at me again, a longer, more thoughtful appraisal this time. His gaze wasn't invasive, but it was thorough. It felt as though he were taking in every detail, my worn jeans, my frayed sweater, the nervous way I was clasping my hands behind my back. I felt utterly transparent. "There's no need for you to leave," he said, his tone matter of fact. I blinked. "I'm sorry. The house is large," he stated, as if it were the simplest fact in the world. "I'll be in my study most of the time. Your presence is no disturbance. Please stay. Fulfill the term of your agreement." He gestured vaguely toward the guest wing. "You're comfortable in those rooms?" "Yes, very," I managed to say. "Thank you." "Good." He picked up his briefcase. The conversation, it seemed, was over. He started to turn toward the grand staircase, then paused. "Leo," he said, his back still mostly to me. "Yes." "Did you eat?" The question was so unexpected, so domestic, that it completely disarmed me. Yes. I did. Thank you." He gave a slight nod. "Good night." Then, and with that, he ascended the stairs, his footsteps silent on the thick runner. I stood in the hallway for a long time, listening until I could hear nothing but the ticking of the clock and the frantic beating of my own heart. The silence had returned, but it was different now. It was no longer empty. It was occupied. The next morning, I woke with a knot of anxiety in my stomach. The fog had burned off, and brilliant, unforgiving sunlight streamed into my room. The encounter last night felt like a dream. I half expected to walk into the kitchen and find the house empty again, the brief appearance of its owner a figment of my sleep-deprived imagination. But when I entered the kitchen, the scent of fresh coffee hung in the air. Arthur Vance stood with his back to me, looking out the panoramic window at the ocean. He was wearing the same dark trousers and a soft gray cashmere sweater that looked impossibly comfortable. A half-empty mug was on the counter beside him. He must have heard me, because he turned without any sign of being startled. "Good morning," he said. His eyes were clearer today, the fatigue replaced by a quiet watchfulness. "There's coffee, if you'd like some." and help yourself to anything in the refrigerator. Good morning, I replied, my voice still hushed, as if I were in a library. Thank you. I moved cautiously to the coffee machine, feeling his gaze on me. It wasn't a hard gaze, but it was steady. The weight of his attention was a physical thing. I poured a mug, my hand trembling slightly. I trust you slept well, he said. It felt like polite small talk, but with him, it seemed to carry more weight, as if he were genuinely inquiring about my state of being. I did, thank you, I lied. I'd spend hours staring at the ceiling, replaying our brief conversation. He nodded, turning back to the window. An awkward silence stretched between us, filled only by the hum of the refrigerator. I didn't know the protocol for this. Do I retreat to my room? Do I make conversation with the billionaire whose house I'm accidentally cohabiting? I took a sip of coffee. It was dark and strong and perfect. Of course it was. I have some work that will keep me occupied for the next few days, he said, as if sensing my uncertainty. I'll be in my study. Please, make yourself at home. Don't feel you need to be invisible. The irony of that statement was not lost on me. I had been trying to be invisible since the moment I arrived. Now, with him here, it was impossible. His presence filled the house, a low, steady hum of energy beneath the silence. I understand, I said. Thank you, Mr. Vance. He turned his head slightly, a small frown line appearing between his brows. Arthur, he corrected me, his voice gentle but firm. My employees call me Mr. Vance. You are a guest in my home. The distinction was clear. It was also terrifying. It implied a level of familiarity I was nowhere near ready for. Arthur, I repeated quietly, testing the name on my tongue. It felt strange, too personal. He gave a single, satisfied nod, and then moved away, carrying his mug toward a hallway I hadn't yet explored. The East Wing is my private space, he said over his shoulder, a simple statement of fact, not a warning. The study, my bedroom. The rest of the house is yours to use as you wish. And just like that, he was gone, leaving me alone in the sun-drenched kitchen. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The rules had been established. Boundaries had been drawn with quiet, unassailable authority. He had given me permission to exist in his space, but the invisible lines were clear. And yet, his correction, Arthur, felt like the opening of a door, just a crack. A door I was far too intimidated to walk through. The next few days settled into a strange, silent rhythm. I would wake early and find coffee already made. I would spend my days on the terrace or in the vast, book-lined library, sketching or reading. I never saw him during the day. Sometimes, I would hear the faint, muffled sound of his voice from behind the closed door of his study, presumably on a call. The sound was a reminder of the world he commanded, a world so far removed from my own. In the evenings, he would emerge. He'd find me in the library and simply sit in one of the large leather armchairs, sometimes with a book, sometimes with a tablet. He rarely spoke, but his presence was a constant, a quiet gravity that pulled the atmosphere of the room around him. I tried to continue my sketching, but my hand was unsteady. I was acutely aware of him, of the way the light from the reading lamp caught the silver in his hair, the way his long fingers rested on the arm of the chair, the soft sound of him turning a page. I started observing him in small, stolen glances. He had a stillness about him that was absolute. When he read, he was completely absorbed. There was no fidgeting, no restless energy, just a deep, focused calm. When he wasn't reading, he would sometimes just look out the window into the encroaching twilight, his expression thoughtful, almost melancholic. I wondered what a man who had everything could possibly be melancholic about. I began to analyze his every small action, the way he would pause before speaking, as if weighing each word for its precise meaning. The way his eyes would soften almost imperceptibly when he looked at something that pleased him, a particular painting, the view of the sunset. I was cataloging these micro-expressions, hoarding them like secrets, trying to build a more complete picture of the man behind the legend. He was a puzzle, and I, with nothing else to occupy my anxious mind, had become obsessed with solving it. One evening, he broke the silence. I was sketching the intricate pattern of a Persian rug, completely lost in the geometry of it, when his voice startled me. "You have a good hand," he said. I looked up. He was watching me, his head tilted slightly. His gaze wasn't on my face, but on the sketchbook in my lap. I felt a blush creep up my neck. My art was personal, the only part of me that felt truly my own. Having his analytical gaze on it felt deeply exposing. Thank you, I mumbled, closing the book instinctively. A flicker of something, disappointment, crossed his face before it was gone. You don't have to hide it, he said softly. May I? He gestured toward the sketchbook. My heart did a painful little flip. This felt like a test. I hesitated for a fraction of a second too long. Then slowly, I held it out to him. He leaned forward, taking it from me. His fingers brushed against mine, just for a moment. The contact was brief, accidental, but a jolt of warmth shot up my arm. It was the first time we had touched. The simple, fleeting brush of skin against skin felt monumental. He didn't seem to notice. He opened the sketchbook with a reverence that surprised me. He turned the pages slowly, his expression unreadable. He lingered on a detailed drawing of an old, gnarled olive tree in the garden, then on a quick, gestural sketch of the waves crashing on the rocks below. I held my breath, waiting for a verdict. I felt like I was back in art school, presenting my portfolio for critique. You see the structure in things, he said at last, his voice quiet and contemplative. He looked up from the book, his gray eyes meeting mine directly. Not just the surface, the bones. His assessment was so astute, so perfectly aimed at the heart of what I tried to do, that it left me speechless. No one had ever described my work like that. Clients talked about branding and color palettes. Friends said it was nice. Arthur Vance saw the bones. That's what I aim for, I finally managed to say. He closed the book gently and handed it back to me. Our fingers didn't touch this time. I felt a pang of disappointment, which was immediately followed by a wave of self-recrimination. What was I doing, wanting to be touched by this man? This powerful, distant, older man who was, for all intents and purposes, my temporary employer. You're a graphic designer, Clara told me, he said. It wasn't a question. I am. Or, I was, I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. A bitter taste filled my mouth. His gaze sharpened slightly. I looked down at my hands. There was no point in lying. My equipment failed. I'm between things at the moment. The euphemism sounded pathetic in the opulent silence of his library. He was silent for a long moment. I braced myself for a platitude, a polite murmur of sympathy. Instead, he said, equipment can be replaced. Talent cannot. And then he stood up. I'm going to make some tea. Would you like some? The sudden shift in topic was jarring. Oh, yes, please. He left the room, and I sat there, his words echoing in the space he'd left behind. Talent cannot. It wasn't pity. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the same quiet authority he used for everything. And for the first time in weeks, a tiny, fragile seed of hope began to take root in the barren ground of my anxiety. He had seen me, not just the awkward, broke young man house-sitting for him. He had seen the bones. The next day, a storm rolled in. It wasn't like the fog. This was a proper California tempest, with lashing rain and a wind that howled around the corners of the house. The power flickered twice, then went out with a definitive sigh, plunging the villa into a gray, watery twilight. The silence was instantly replaced by the roar of the wind and the percussive drumming of rain against the glass. I found a few emergency candles in a kitchen drawer and was trying to light one with a cheap lighter that refused to spark when Arthur appeared in the doorway. He was holding two heavy-duty flashlights, their beams cutting sharp cones through the gloom. The generator should have kicked in, he said, his voice calm despite the elemental chaos outside. The service company was supposed to have checked it last month, he frowned, a look of genuine annoyance on his face. It was the most emotion I'd seen him display. It seems they didn't. It's all right, I said, finally getting a candle lit. The small flame danced wildly, casting long, spooky shadows on the wall. No, it's not, he countered, his tone clipped. There's a manual override in the utility room, but it's a two-person job to reset the main breaker. He handed me one of the flashlights. The plastic casing was cool and solid in my hand. I'll need your help. It wasn't a request, but it wasn't an order, either. It was a simple statement of necessity. We were two people in a house without power. The dynamic had shifted. He wasn't the billionaire owner, and I the lowly house sitter. We were just partners in a task. Of course, I said, my voice steady for once. He led the way down a narrow set of stairs off the kitchen, our flashlight beams bouncing off the stone walls. The utility room was at the basement level, a cavern of concrete and pipes. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and ozone. The main breaker box was an intimidating metal cabinet on the far wall, next to a large, silent generator. "I'll talk you through it," he said, setting his flashlight down so its beam pointed at the ceiling, providing a general, ambient light. "It's perfectly safe, but the switch is heavy. I need you to hold the release lever down while I throw the main switch. You'll need to hold it firmly." He opened the cabinet. Inside was a complex array of switches and wires. He pointed to a thick, spring-loaded lever. "This one here. When I tell you, press it down and hold it. Don't let go until I say so." I nodded, my focus entirely on the task. I positioned myself, gripping the cold metal lever. "Ready?" I said. He moved to stand beside me, his shoulder brushing against mine. The space was tight. I was suddenly aware of his proximity, of the clean, subtle scent of his sweater and the warmth radiating from his body. It was a stark contrast to the cool, damp air of the room. I tried to ignore it, to focus on the lever in my hand. "Now," he said. I pushed down. The lever was stiffer than I expected, and I had to put my whole weight into it. My muscles strained. Arthur reached up and gripped the large main switch with both hands. He was so close I could hear the soft sound of his breathing, a steady, even rhythm against the backdrop of the storm. "Okay," he grunted, pulling the switch. It resisted with a deep groan. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a loud, satisfying clunk, the switch engaged. The generator outside the room sputtered once, twice, then roared to life. A second later, the overhead fluorescent lights flickered on, flooding the room with harsh, white light. "You can let go," he said. I released the lever, my arm aching from the effort. The sudden brightness was blinding after the gloom. We both blinked, our eyes adjusting. We were standing shoulder to shoulder, caught in the sterile light, the shared task complete. "Thank you," he said, and his voice was different. The commanding tone was gone, replaced by something softer, almost gentle. He was looking at me, and his gray eyes held a warmth I hadn't seen before. The professional mask had slipped, just for a moment, revealing the man beneath. "You're welcome," I said, my voice a little breathless. In that moment, suspended in the hum of the generator and the unflattering fluorescent light, something shifted between us. We had relied on each other. We had worked together, as equals. The carefully constructed boundaries of wealth and status had dissolved, leaving just two men in a basement, having solved a problem. He seemed to feel it too. A strange tension hung in the air, a silence that was different from the comfortable quiet of the library. It was charged, expectant. His gaze dropped from my eyes to my mouth, just for a fraction of a second, but I saw it. My heart beat a frantic, hopeful rhythm. Then the moment broke. He took a small step back, creating space between us again. The mask of the calm, composed owner slipped back into place, but it didn't fit as well as it had before. The cracks were showing. "I need to make a call to the service company," he said, his voice once again brisk and businesslike. "They'll be hearing from me." He turned and left the utility room without a backward glance. I stood there for a moment longer, my hand still tingling from the pressure of the lever. The warmth from where his shoulder had brushed against mine lingered like a brand. I had seen something in his eyes, a flicker of vulnerability, a hint of want, and it mirrored the want that was blooming, wild and terrifying, in my own chest. Later that evening, the storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean. The air was cool and crisp, and the sky was a deep, star-dusted indigo. The power was back, the house was warm, and everything was as it should be. But nothing felt the same. I found Arthur on the terrace, standing by the stone balustrade, looking out at the dark ocean. He had a glass of what looked like whiskey in his hand. He didn't seem to hear me approach, lost in his thoughts. "The sky is clear," I said softly, not wanting to startle him. He turned. A faint smile touched his lips. "It always is, after a storm." He gestured with his glass toward the other side of the terrace. A chaotic but effective way to clean the slate. I walked over to stand beside him, leaving a respectable distance between us. The silence that fell was comfortable, companionable. We stood like that for several minutes, just watching the moonlight shimmer on the surface of the water. "Leo," he said finally, his voice low. He didn't look at me. I find myself in an unfamiliar position. My breath hitched. I stayed silent, knowing this was important. I am a man who values control, he continued, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. In my business, in my life, I build systems. I anticipate variables. I eliminate uncertainty. He paused, taking a slow sip. You were an unforeseen variable. My stomach tightened. Here it comes, I thought. The gentle dismissal. And yet, he went on, his voice dropping even lower. I find I have no desire to eliminate this particular variable. He turned his head then, his gaze finding mine in the dim light. His eyes were dark, serious. I am aware of the imbalance here. My age, my financial position, this house. I would not, for a moment, want you to feel pressured, or obligated, or pursued. He was laying his cards on the table. He was acknowledging the power dynamic, naming it, and in doing so, attempting to neutralize it. He was giving me all the power, all the choice. It was the most respectful, most considerate thing anyone had ever done for me. What do you want, Arthur? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The question felt impossibly bold. His gaze was unwavering. What I want is irrelevant if it is not what you want as well. He took a small step closer, closing the distance I had so carefully maintained. The air between us crackled. I enjoy your presence in this house, Leo. I enjoy your quiet company. I enjoy you. But I need to know that you are here of your own free will. Not just as a house sitter, but as a guest. My guest. This is it. This is the moment. My heart is pounding, a frantic drum against my ribs. The fear is still there, a cold knot in my belly, but something else is rising to meet it. A fierce, defiant hope. I can retreat. I can murmur something polite and noncommittal, and we can go back to being the billionaire and the house sitter, and this charged, beautiful, terrifying thing between us will wither and die. Or I can be brave. I take a breath. I'm not here because of the house. Arthur, the words come out stronger than I expect. I'm not staying because of the agreement. I look directly into his eyes, pouring all the unspoken yearning of the past week into my gaze. I'm staying because of you. The admission hangs in the cool night air between us. His expression softens, the last of his formidable guard melting away. What's left is just a man, looking at me with a vulnerability that mirrors my own. He has opened a door, and I have just walked through it. The choice was mine, and I have made it. And I have never felt more certain, or more terrified, in my entire life. The days that followed were a study in subtle shifts. Nothing, on the surface, had changed. We still maintained our separate routines. He spent his days in his study. I spent mine reading or sketching. But the space between us had been redrawn. The silence was no longer just comfortable, it was intimate. The glances we exchanged across the library were no longer just observational. They were filled with a quiet, shared understanding. He started leaving his study door ajar. It was a small thing, but it felt significant. An invitation. Sometimes I would walk past and hear him on a call, his voice that familiar, authoritative baritone, and I would feel a strange thrill being privy to this other side of him. Then the call would end, and the silence would return, but it was a silence I was now a part of. One afternoon, I was walking past the open door when he called my name. Leo, could I borrow your eye for a moment? I stopped, my heart giving a little flutter. Of course. I stepped into the study. I had never been inside before. It was just as I'd imagined. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a large, clean desk with two enormous monitors, and a window that framed a perfect view of the cypress trees along the cliffs. It smelled of him. That same scent of paper and something clean and masculine, like expensive soap. He was sitting at his desk, but he swiveled his chair to face me. On one of the monitors was a website design. A corporate logo, clean and minimalist. This is the new landing page for one of our foundation's initiatives, he said. The design firm we hired sent this over. Something about it feels static. Uninspired, he looked at me. What do you think? He was asking for my professional opinion. He was treating me as a peer. I walked closer, my nervousness battling with a surge of professional confidence. I looked at the screen, my designer's eye kicking in, automatically deconstructing the layout, the typography, the use of negative space. The balance is off, I said, thinking aloud. The main header is too heavy. It's crushing the content below it. And the call to action button is lost. The color is too passive. I pointed to the screen. If you shifted this image to the left and stacked the text here, you'd create a natural flow for the eye. leading it directly to the button. It would feel more dynamic, more inviting. I spoke for a few minutes, outlining the changes I would make, the small tweaks to typography and spacing that would make the design breathe. I was so caught up in the problem that I forgot to be intimidated. I was in my element. When I finished, I turned to him, a little breathless, worried I had overstepped. But he wasn't looking at the screen. He was looking at me, and his expression was one of quiet, profound admiration. There was a warmth in his eyes that made my stomach swoop. "Exactly," he said, his voice soft. "Static. You brought it to life, just with your words." He looked back at the screen, then at me again. "I should have hired you." The statement hung in the air. Was it a compliment? An offer? I didn't know how to respond. "I on my laptop," I stammered, the familiar shame washing over me. He waved a hand, dismissing the excuse. "That's a logistical problem. A solvable 1 inch." He held my gaze for a long moment. "We'll speak more on this." It wasn't a promise of a job. It was something else. A promise of consideration. A validation of my worth that was completely separate from the fragile, budding intimacy between us. He was seeing all of me, the artist, the man, and valuing both. The next afternoon, a courier arrived. The granite-faced security guard called the house, his voice for once losing its stony composure. "Mr. Vance, there's a delivery here for Mr. Leo Thorne." Arthur answered the call in the kitchen, where I was making a sandwich. He listened, then said simply, "Yes, that's correct. Send him up." I looked at him, confused. A delivery for me? I didn't order anything. Arthur just gave me a small, enigmatic smile and went back to reading his newspaper. A few minutes later, the doorbell chimed. I opened it to find a courier holding a large, sleek box. I signed for it numbly and brought it inside, setting it on the dining table. It was from a high-end tech store. I looked at Arthur, a question in my eyes. He folded his newspaper neatly and set it aside. "It's a logistical problem," he said, echoing his words from yesterday. "This is the solution." My hands trembled as I opened the box. Inside, nestled in a bed of pristine white cardboard, was a brand-new, top-of-the-line laptop. The exact model I had spent months dreaming of, the one that was so far beyond my financial reach, it was laughable. It was a machine built for power, for creativity. It was a future. I stared at it, speechless. A war of emotions raged inside me. Gratitude, so immense it was painful. And shame, a deep, burning shame. This was too much. This was the power imbalance made manifest, a gleaming, expensive symbol of everything that separated us. "I can't accept this," I said, my voice thick. Arthur's expression didn't change. "Why not?" he asked calmly. "Because it's too much," I choked out. "It makes me feel like I'm being bought." The word was ugly, but it was honest. He didn't flinch. He stood up and walked over to the table, his movements slow and deliberate. He didn't look at the laptop. He looked at me. "Is that what you think I'm doing?" he asked, his voice low and serious. "Do you think my respect for your talent can be purchased? Do you think my affection is transactional?" "No, but—" "This is not a gift, Leo," he interrupted, his voice firm but not unkind. "It is a tool. This house has a library full of books I'll never read and a wine cellar with vintages I'll never drink. It is now also equipped with a professional-grade computer. As my guest, you are free to use any of the house's amenities." He was framing it with impeccable logic, creating a fiction of impartiality to spare my pride. But we both knew what it was. It was an act of profound care. It was him seeing a problem I had and solving it, not to indebt me, but simply because he could, because he wanted to. "Arthur," I whispered, my throat tight. Let's make a deal," he said, his tone softening. "Consider it a loan. Once you're back on your feet, you can pay me back. Or, better yet," his eyes glinted with something that looked like amusement, "you can provide consulting services to my foundation's design committee. At your usual rate, of course. Your first task will be to write a scathing report on their current design firm." He was giving me an out, a way to reframe it, to maintain my dignity. He was handing me back my agency on a silver platter. Tears pricked my eyes. I looked from the impossibly sleek machine to his calm, steady face. The fear I had of being a kept man, a charity case, began to recede, replaced by a wave of overwhelming emotion. He wasn't trying to own me. He was trying to free me. "Okay," I said, my voice cracking. "Okay." He nodded, a flicker of relief in his own eyes. Good, he said simply. He rested his hand on my shoulder, his thumb stroking the fabric of my shirt just once. The touch was brief, grounding. Now, I believe you have work to do. That evening, the tension that had been simmering between us for days finally reached its breaking point. I had spent the afternoon setting up the new laptop, the process feeling sacred, like a ritual. I had installed my software, loaded my old files from a backup drive. I felt whole again, capable. The feeling was intoxicating. I knew I had to talk to him. This couldn't continue in the realm of subtext and loaded gestures. The laptop sitting on my desk was a declaration, and it demanded a response in kind. I found him in the library, as I knew I would. He was reading, the room quiet save for the ticking clock. I stood in the doorway for a moment, gathering my courage. He looked up, as if he'd been expecting me. He closed his book, marking his page, and gave me his full attention. Arthur, I began, my voice steadier than I thought it would be. I walked into the room, stopping a few feet from his chair. We need to talk. I agree, he said, his gaze serious. I took a deep breath. What happened today, with the computer? I want to thank you. But I also need to understand. I need to know what this is. I gestured vaguely between us. All of it. He didn't answer right away. He stood up, slowly, and came to stand in front of me. He was taller than me, and I had to tilt my head back slightly to meet his eyes. The proximity was electric. I told you what it was, he said, his voice a low murmur. It is a tool, but you are not asking about the computer, are you, Leo? No, I admitted, my voice dropping to a whisper. I'm not. I have tried, he said, his eyes searching mine, to be careful, to respect the boundaries of your situation, to not take advantage of the fact that you are under my roof. You haven't, I said quickly. You've been more respectful of my autonomy than anyone I've ever met. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. I'm glad to hear that, but it has made it difficult. Difficult how? I pressed, needing to hear it. He reached out, his hand hovering in the air for a moment before he gently cupped my jaw. His thumb stroked my skin, a slow, deliberate motion that sent a tremor through my entire body. His touch was warm, his skin slightly rough. It was the most exquisitely gentle thing I had ever felt. Difficult because all I have wanted to do since the moment I came home and found you standing in my hallway, he said, his voice thick with an emotion he could no longer conceal. Is this? And then he leaned down and he kissed me. It was not a kiss of passion, of pent-up demand. It was a kiss of arrival. It was slow and soft and breathtakingly tender. His lips were firm and warm, and they moved against mine with a searching, questioning gentleness. It was a confession, an offering, and an apology all in one. All the unspoken conversations, all the charged glances, all the quiet yearning of the past week culminated in this one perfect, unhurried point of contact. My mind, which had been racing for days, went completely silent. There was no more analysis, no more fear, no more overthinking. There was only this, the solid warmth of his hand on my face, the soft pressure of his mouth on mine, the clean scent of him, the quiet sound of our breathing. It felt right. It felt like coming home to a place I had never been before. I lifted my hands and rested them on his chest, feeling the steady, solid beat of his heart beneath my palms. I leaned into the kiss, answering his gentle pressure with my own, a silent affirmation. Yes, this. Me too. He deepened the kiss slightly, a soft sigh escaping him. It was a sound of relief, of surrender. He brought his other hand up to my waist, pulling me closer until there was no space left between us. I felt enveloped by his presence, by his warmth, by his steady strength. I felt, for the first time in a very long time, completely and utterly safe. When he finally broke the kiss, he didn't pull away. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. We stood like that for a long moment, just breathing each other in. His hand was still on my jaw, his thumb tracing a soothing pattern on my skin. Leo, he murmured, his voice rough. I couldn't speak. I just laced my fingers together behind his neck, holding on to him, anchoring myself in the reality of the moment. He opened his eyes, and the cool gray of them was now dark with emotion, with a depth of feeling that took my breath away. He looked at me as if I were something precious, something he had been waiting for a very long time. The imposing billionaire, the titan of industry, was gone. In his place was Arthur. Just Arthur. And in his eyes, I was not the broke, anxious young man who had stumbled into his life. I was Leo, just Leo, and that was more than enough. The morning after was disorienting. I woke up in my own bed in the guest suite, the sheets cool against my skin. For a moment, I thought I had dreamt it all. The confession, the shattering tenderness of his kiss, the feeling of his forehead pressed against mine. But then I lifted my hand to my lips, and I could still feel the phantom pressure of his mouth, the ghost of his warmth. It was real. A wave of anxiety, cold and sharp, washed over me, chasing away the warmth. What now? What did that kiss mean in the unforgiving light of day? The power dynamic we had so carefully navigated last night felt immense again, a chasm between his world and mine. He was Arthur Vance, and I was just Leo, a man living in his house, using a laptop he had bought. The thought sent a fresh wave of shame through me. I dressed slowly, my stomach in knots. I dreaded seeing him. I dreaded the potential for awkwardness, for regret, either his or mine. I walked to the kitchen like a man walking to his own execution. He was there, of course, standing at the counter, pouring 2 mugs of coffee. He was dressed for the day in tailored trousers and a crisp blue shirt, sleeves rolled up to the elbows. He looked as calm and composed as ever. He glanced up as I entered, and his expression was soft. There was no regret in his eyes, only a quiet, gentle watchfulness. "Good morning," he said, his voice the same low, steady tone as always. He pushed one of the mugs across the counter toward me. "Morning," I mumbled, wrapping my cold hands around the warm ceramic. I didn't know what to say. "Thank you for the coffee." He leaned against the counter, cradling his own mug. The silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was hesitant, shy. It was the silence of a new beginning, fragile and uncertain. He was the one to break it. "I have no regrets about last night, Leo," he said, his voice quiet but firm, his gaze direct. "I want to be very clear about that." Relief washed over me so intensely I felt dizzy. "Me neither," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Good." He took a sip of his coffee, his eyes never leaving mine. "But I am also aware that this changes things. And I want to navigate this in a way that continues to respect your independence." He set his mug down with a soft click. "Which is why I have a proposition for you." My stomach tightened again. "A proposition? A professional one," he clarified immediately. "Yesterday, you identified the flaws in my foundation's website in less than 5 minutes. The firm we have on retainer has been billing us for 6 months and has yet to demonstrate a fraction of your insight," he paused. "I want to offer you a formal contract. A 3-month project to oversee the redesign. You would work with my team, liaise with the foundation. You would be paid your standard professional rate. You could work from here or from your own apartment. The choice would be yours." I stared at him, my mind reeling. It was a real job, a lifeline, a way for me to regain my financial footing, my professional pride. But it was also more than that. He was deliberately, carefully, building a wall between our professional and personal lives. He was handing me my independence, ensuring that I would never feel like I was dependent on him. He wasn't just solving the logistical problem of my unemployment. He was solving the much more complex problem of my pride. "This would be a formal arrangement," he continued, as if sensing my internal conflict. "You would report to the foundation's director. I would be, for all intents and purposes, entirely out of the professional loop. Our relationship, what is developing between us, would be separate." It was brilliant. It was thoughtful. It was him, through and through, seeing a complex problem and engineering an elegant, ethical solution. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, needing to hear the truth behind the practicalities. "Because," he said, his voice softening, "I want to be with you, Leo. But I don't want to be with a man who feels beholden to me. I want a partner, an equal. This," he gestured around the kitchen, "is my world. I want you to have your own, too. So that when you choose to be in mine, it is a choice, not a necessity." The last of my anxiety dissolved, washed away by a profound sense of being seen, of being cherished. He wasn't trying to keep me in a gilded cage. He was handing me the key and showing me the door, trusting that I would choose to stay. "Yes," I said, my voice clear and strong. "I accept. The contract, I mean." A genuine, beautiful smile transformed his face. It reached his eyes, crinkling the corners, making him look younger, happier. "Good," he said. "I'll have my assistant draw up the paperwork." Then the smile softened into something more intimate. "And Leo," he said, stepping around the counter until he was standing in front of me, "I would very much like to kiss you again." My own smile broke free, wide and unrestrained. "Yes," I said. "I would like that too." A week later, I was invited to a dinner. It wasn't a grand affair, just a small gathering at the villa. Arthur's business partner and his wife, and a couple who were old family friends. It was the first time I would be seen with him in a social context. The first test. I was a nervous wreck. I spent an hour deciding what to wear, finally settling on dark trousers, a crisp white shirt, and a simple gray blazer. It was the best I had, but I felt painfully underdressed, an imposter in this world of casual, bespoke elegance. Arthur found me fussing with my collar in the hallway. He came up behind me, his hands settling on my shoulders, his presence a warm, calming weight. "You look perfect," he said, his voice a low murmur in my ear. He met my eyes in the mirror. "You look like you." He was wearing a dark, beautifully cut suit, no tie. He looked powerful and relaxed. He squeezed my shoulders gently. "They're just people, Leo. Don't perform. Just be." The evening started well enough. The other guests were polite, friendly. They asked me about my work, and thanks to Arthur's contract, I could speak about the foundation project with genuine confidence. I felt myself begin to relax. Arthur stayed near me, not hovering, but always present. A hand on the small of my back as he introduced me, a shared glance across the table. They were small gestures of inclusion, of possession, and they made me feel anchored. The trouble came, as it often does, in the form of a subtle, condescending question. It was from the business partner, a man named Marcus who had a smile that never quite reached his eyes. "So, Leo," he said, swirling his wine. "A graphic designer. That's fascinating." Arthur has always had a keen eye for aesthetics. The word hung in the air, weighted with insinuation. Aesthetics. As if I were a piece of art Arthur had acquired, a pleasing object. The wife shifted uncomfortably. The other couple suddenly became very interested in their dessert. A hot flush of shame and anger rose in me. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, to defend myself, but before I could, Arthur spoke. His voice was perfectly calm, almost mild. "He does," Arthur agreed, looking directly at Marcus. "And Leo is one of the most talented designers I've ever met. His structural insights are revitalizing the foundation's entire public-facing strategy. He's a tremendous asset." He then turned his gaze to me, and the warmth in his eyes was a public declaration. "And I am a very lucky man to have him in my life." He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't been confrontational. But the message was unmistakable. He had not only defended my professional credibility, he had publicly claimed me, emotionally. He'd shut Marcus down with quiet, surgical precision, affirming my value on every level. The tension at the table broke. Marcus mumbled an apology, and the conversation moved on. Later, after the guests had left, we stood on the terrace, the cool night air a balm. "I'm sorry about Marcus," Arthur said. "He can be an ass." "You handled it," I said, looking at him. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," he countered, turning to face me. "An attack on you is an attack on me. We are together in this, Leo. I need you to know that." He took my hand, his fingers lacing with mine. The simple gesture felt like a vow. The test had come, and we had faced it. Together. In that moment, I knew this was real. This wasn't a temporary arrangement, a fleeting affair. This was the beginning of a partnership. The next month was a blur of activity. I threw myself into the foundation project, my creativity surging, fueled by the new laptop and a newfound confidence. I set up a small workspace for myself in a corner of the vast library, creating my own territory within his world. We worked out a new rhythm. We would work separately during the day, then come together in the evenings, not as owner and guest, but as two men sharing a home. We talked for hours. I told him about my childhood, my struggles in art school, my dreams. He told me about his early years building his company, the sacrifices he'd made, the loneliness that had settled in after his success was assured. He spoke of his late wife, who had died a decade earlier, with a quiet, gentle sadness. He was opening up the locked rooms of his past, letting me in. We decided, together, that I would keep my old apartment in the city. It was important for me to have a space that was solely mine, a symbol of my independence. But I spent most of my nights at the villa. Arthur gave me a key to the front door. Not the guest key, but a key to his own ring. The weight of it in my palm felt more significant than any diamond. One Saturday morning, I woke up early, the sun just beginning to paint the sky in shades of rose and gold. Arthur was still asleep. I slipped out of bed and went to the kitchen. The house was quiet, peaceful. I put on the coffee and started pulling ingredients from the refrigerator: eggs, cheese, some vegetables. I was going to make him breakfast. The simple domesticity of the act filled me with a quiet, profound joy. This kitchen, which had once felt so intimidating, now felt like mine. This house, which had once been a symbol of his power, now felt like our home. I was at the stove, scrambling eggs, when I felt his arm slide around my waist from behind. He rested his chin on my shoulder, his body warm against my back. He didn't speak, just held me, his embrace secure and comforting. "Good morning," I said softly, leaning my head back against his. "Morning," he murmured, his voice thick with sleep. He nuzzled my neck, his stubble pleasantly rough against my skin. "Smells good." "It's just eggs," I laughed. "It's everything," he said quietly. We ate breakfast together on the terrace, the rising sun warming our faces. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. We just sat in the companionable silence, drinking our coffee, sharing the simple, beautiful meal. The waves crashed on the shore below, a steady, eternal rhythm. I looked at him, at the way the morning light caught the silver in his hair, at the calm, contented expression on his face. The differences between us were still there: the years, the money, the life experience. They would always be there, but they were no longer a barrier. They were just part of the landscape of our lives, the context for the man I had come to love. He had used his resources not to control me, but to care for me. He had used his power not to diminish me, but to lift me up. He had seen my potential and given me the tools to realize it, all while asking for nothing in return but for me to be myself. He had created a space where I could be not just his partner, but his equal. He caught me looking at him and smiled, that slow, genuine smile that still made my heart skip a beat. He reached across the small table and took my hand. His touch was warm, solid, and real. In that moment, I felt a sense of peace so deep it was almost startling. The anxiety that had been my constant companion for so long was gone. The fear of the future, the shame of the past, it had all been washed away, replaced by a quiet, steady certainty. I was no longer adrift. I was anchored. I was home. And I knew, with a clarity that was as bright and brilliant as the morning sun, that this was just the beginning. Share your thoughts in the comments. What moment stayed with you? If the story resonated, a like helps others find it. Subscribe for more slow burn male/male love stories told with warmth and care.